Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, coming to you 6 days a week as we interview whitetail experts and hear their traditions and personal stories of the hunt. Learn more about the latest gear, discover proven tips, and the latest strategies so you can make your next hunt a success. Now, here's your host, Bruce Hutchin.
This is Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast with your host, Bruce Hutchin, episode number 270. Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. This is your host, Bruce Hutchin, and we're going to head out to Colorado today and meet with a gentleman, Aaron Neilson. Aaron has hunted across the globe, literally, folks, and he's got some great stories about North America, about Africa, but the biggest thing I want to share with you right now, hunting is not what I do, but who I am. And he and I are going to talk about common ground. When you hunt throughout the world, as Aaron has, you meet up with a lot of different folks, a lot of different cultures. But guess what? When you're sitting around the campfire, you all have reached common ground because we are hunters. Not everybody hunts, but in a sense, we are all hunters. So I want you to think about that as we share some great stories with Aaron Neilson of Global Hunt. Hey, listener, don't forget to text 33444 Food Plot for your free Food Plot ebook. Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. Folks, we're staying right here in Colorado. As you know, I live in Colorado and hunt. I've been blessed to hunt all over North America. But we're going to talk to a guy, Aaron Neilson, who's hunted, as his company says, Global Hunting Resources. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Hey, Bruce. Hey, man. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and as we talked about in the warm-up, a lot of guys and gals from the Midwest, you know, they dream about coming out west, coming out to the Rocky Mountains and hunting elk or mule deer and antelope and just chasing critters out in completely different environment. What are some of the let's take 5 things that you would give advice to if somebody's thinking about coming out for their first Western hunt?
Well, listen, first of all, I think that people need to realize, as most of them I think already do, that you obviously are getting into a whole different ballgame when you start going out west. I mean, the country's big. There's a lot of open expanse. There's a lot of different states and a lot of different things to choose from. And, of course, licensing and different things can be different in each state you go to. So I think first and foremost would be to tell a person to, really try to focus in on what it is that you want to hunt, whether it be a mule deer or an elk, and try to narrow it down to where you think you might want to do that. Secondly, one thing that I see that people, when they come out west, they don't realize is just simply how big the country is. And unlike a lot of people who are hunting back east or in the Midwest, where it's, thick wooded terrain, they don't seem to understand how important things like optics are in the West versus they are, like I say, back in the heavily treed areas of the East. So try to make sure that you have the good optics and are available to and able to glass and see long distances, unlike what you have to do in some other places. Secondly or thirdly, I would say, is to try to fit your. Let's say you're coming out on a gun hunt, for example. If you're going to be a gun hunter and you're going to come out elk hunting, try to fit, your weapon and your caliber choice to what you expect might happen out here. Again, unlike what happens a lot, down south and back east, where you might have a long shot of 100 yards. Quite the opposite can be true here. You might have a long shot of 300 or 400 yards. So I think, choosing the weapon and the caliber to fit the style of hunting that you're going to be doing out here would be very important. Another issue you guys might want to consider is make sure you're prepared, for what you're getting yourself into. Again, oftentimes out here, if you're going to be hunting elk, you're going to shoot an elk maybe in a canyon 2-3 miles from a road. Unlike back east, where oftentimes you can get a buggy or a vehicle fairly close. So, be prepared to come here with the right gear, frame packs and strong legs and deep lungs, so you can make sure and do all the work that it takes to, get those things done. But I think, if people will just take the time to kind of study a little bit more about what they're getting themselves into in a completely different scenario. No different than I or you would if we're going back there. We're going to have to completely adapt our hunting tactics, and the same has to happen when you come out here.
Now, as we talked in the warm-up, my first foray out west, we're all whitetail hunters, archery, and we did a little scouting. This is before Google Earth and all this. We talked to some people, and we decided where to go and got into it. I remember talking to Dwight Shue at Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. He said, well, if you're going to come out west, buy my book. I said, okay, fine, I'll buy your book. But what I found out, hunting, north-facing slopes, cool today, listened for the vocalization of the elk. Now, deer do, whitetails do vocalize, but certainly not as a herd, that elk are. And they tremendous amount of vocalization. Even, I'm not even talking about bugling. And we learned all that, and then we applied it. And I've been told by outfitters out west that whitetail hunters make really good elk hunters. Why do you think that is?
Well, listen, especially if you're talking about whitetails in the West or Midwest, I do think that the tactics are quite similar. The whitetails that you and I might be used to here in Colorado, Wyoming, that sort of thing, have adapted to a much more nomadic way of life like an elk and a mule deer has. They're not real patternable. They're not, their territories and their range is much wider and much greater than what you'll see, in hardwoods back east. And so you're able to utilize a lot of the very same tactics, open country glassing, open country stalking, and that sort of thing. At least that's been my experience here, where I've spent the vast majority of my time hunting whitetail, which is eastern Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, that sort of thing. I have found that, my elk hunting and mountain mule deer hunting tactics play absolutely the same key essential parts to being successful as a whitetail hunter for me when I go out into some of these open country areas where the whitetails around here like to live.
And it's interesting. A number of my shows this year, people talked about long-distance scouting for whitetails. And people said, what does that mean? Well, what does that mean?
Well, listen, it's very simple. Here's what I'll tell you. When you start dealing with whitetails that live in open country, as we do here, they are a much different animal even than the mule deer. Whitetails, typical response is flight. They want to get away. They want to run. They want to get as far away from anything and anybody as they can. So, what I have found to be most essential when you're trying to be successful on open country whitetails is you've got to be very careful about your movements and careful about letting them know you're anywhere in the country, and I mean within a mile. Lots of long distance glassing, long distance observation of these whitetails. And if you're able to do that and do it without them knowing that you're there, you can very easily figure out what those deer are doing. But unlike the mule deer that'll live in the exact same terrain and you'll see at the exact same time, if you get a vehicle or a person within a half a mile of those guys, they are absolutely gone, unlike where mule deer will often continue to tolerate your presence. So, yeah, everything you do with these open country whitetails, you want to do it from a great distance up until you're ready to go in and get them.
Now, the eastern whitetails, and folks, we're talking about Boone and Crockett class whitetails. And are there a lot of them out in eastern Colorado, or just because they get so big, everybody takes the shots, and then the Boone and Crockett deer get published? Help me out understand what kind of class animal is typical, and then a monster buck is 200 inches.
Well, yeah, listen, I would say this. I don't think a true Boone and Crockett whitetail is common anywhere. I do think that places like eastern Colorado have been greatly overlooked for their potential quality. It's one of the few places I've seen where on a regular basis you can go and harvest a 160 plus whitetail. Personally, I bet I've guided at least 40, if not more, whitetails over 160 in eastern Colorado, and we've killed a couple of bucks over 200. Certainly killed several Boone and Crockett whitetails over the years. There's no doubt that the quality exists there, but part of the reason that the quality that we have in eastern Colorado exists is because the Game and Fish here does do a good job of limiting the availability of the tags rather than just having a free-for-all on the permits. Everything in the eastern third of the state of Colorado is all private land. Most of it farming and ranch country, so they got great food. I mean, it's really an extension of Kansas, and everybody's very familiar with the quality of whitetails that come out of Kansas. And eastern Colorado, for that matter, is really no different.
And you think of that, explain to the folks what it looks like out there, eastern Kansas and western Kansas and eastern Colorado.
Well, listen, it's basically, high plains country. So elevations will range between, 3,000 and maybe 4,000 feet, generally speaking. And when I say it's all ranch and farm country, I mean, it's just that. It's what we call rough pasture or cattle pasture. Certainly a lot of farming. So that including, mostly dryland corn, some irrigated corn, wheat fields, milo fields, for the most part. And of course, CRP is still a factor in eastern Colorado and western Kansas. So when you combine those three elements, I mean, they've got food, they've got water, they've got cover. The plains, due to the fact that they're not a high elevation area, these deer are not suffering from, extreme winters. They don't have to look hard for food because there's crops everywhere, whether it be the wheat or the milo or the corn. They fare very well, and so they have you factor that with the fact that everything is generally private, and they have a recipe to, reach the number one criteria to get big, which is they got to get old.
For the listeners out there that saying, man, I'd love to get out to Kansas, western Kansas, eastern Colorado, what's it going to hit the budget? I mean, to hire an outfitter, because it is a lot of private land, folks. Yes, there may be some little sections here and there, but for the most part, it's private land. So money comes into the play.
Well, listen, there's no doubt. I will tell you that the state of Kansas has done a very good job with their walk-in program, and there's a lot of walk-in access, basically what amounts to public land access throughout Kansas and western Kansas in particular. And I'll tell you, having been out there, more and more recently, I was actually quite surprised at how much good hunting land is registered under the walk-in access. So I think something that people should certainly, be aware of if they're, if they're unable or unwilling or just simply don't want to do a guided hunt. Certainly look into that in Kansas. But yes, other than that, Colorado and Kansas both, highly restrictive private land. And, those hunts out there will range anywhere from, $4,000 to $8,000 a piece, just depending on whether it's a 2x1 or a 1x1 or it's a rifle, archery, whatever the case may be. And, some areas, might charge differently just based on the consistent quality, but definitely, eastern Colorado, western Kansas is generally speaking a place where you don't go and do it yourself hunt, but that's not to say in every case, and that's certainly not the case in western Kansas. People should look into that if they're interested.
Now, I've been fortunate enough, I haven't hunted yet, but I've heard outside of Riverton and other places in Wyoming, there's some decent and eye-popping whitetails. Have you got any information you can share about hunting Wyoming whitetails?
Well, listen, I'll say this. I've spent a little bit of time hunting southeastern Wyoming for whitetails, mainly in the Wheatland area. And, here's been my experience, but this is not to say that it holds true. It's just simply one man's experience that, certainly the whitetails are there. Finding them and locating the deer has not been an issue, but I haven't seen to the regularity, the quality of deer that I see in Colorado and Kansas, and even Nebraska for that matter. Again, not to say that they're not there. We obviously have seen guys that have taken some great whitetails out of Wyoming, but generally speaking, it seems to me my personal experience has been a lot more, the 120 to 140 class of bucks versus, a lot more of the 150 plus class bucks that I've seen, elsewhere here in the West. But again, that's just one man's opinion.
Yeah, and I just throw this on Devil's Tower area. I forget if it's Area A or 1. It's where South Dakota and Wyoming and Montana all come in. I want to say I can't just right now remember the river, but right in that corner, folks, there's a lot of whitetails. And I was fortunate enough to hunt one ranch up there, and we were hunting turkeys. And I couldn't believe, the whitetails that were there, the numbers of whitetails. So that's a don't overlook place as far as I'm concerned. And from what I've heard, don't overlook Wyoming. I know the ranches along Crazy Woman Creek. There's some decent, 150 class whitetails that I've seen. I haven't hunted it yet, but, I've seen them over there. So, we've got Kansas, we've got Colorado, we've got parts of Wyoming, we got the Dakotas. We got a lot of whitetails out west. And, guys and gals, think about heading this way for a really exciting trip. Now let's change up, and a lot of listeners say, "Boys, sometimes I'd like to go to Africa. I'd like to, do the sundowners and just hear a lion roar, but I can't hunt a lion or don't have any interest, but I'd sure like to get plains games." What does that look like? And share some of your experiences that you've had in the dark continent.
Well, listen, Bruce, I've spent a lot of time there. I've been to Africa 36 times. In 8 different countries and hunted pretty much all that they have to offer. And it's a fabulous place. I love it dearly. Here's what I would suggest to, certainly you have your guys that are experienced at it already, but if you have your guys that are first timers or, new to it to trying to get some experience about what Africa is about and how to go about it, I would definitely suggest they contact a reputable hunting consultant or a booking agent. Oftentimes these guys have been there, done that themselves. They represent, multiple or numerous outfitters, and whether it be South Africa or other countries down there, and they can start to give them, a real feel for what it is that they're potentially getting into. And any good agent that is offering hunts to Africa will also, either themselves or work closely with a travel agent that specializes in African travel, taking firearms, shipping and crating of the trophies, the whole 9 yards. Anything that a person is going to want to know about, including the prices and the options and the availability of the game. If they work with, in my opinion, a good agent, you're going to get a variety of different options that he might have available and can guide you based on his own personal experience. That's really where I would start if it was me. Now,
would you start with the plains game just to, get a feel of Africa, or would you say, if you have the time and the wherewithal, go after one of the big 5 or dangerous 7?
Well, listen, that's a good question. A lot of people kind of have that philosophy that maybe starting with the plains game hunt is a good idea. I'll tell you, when I first went there over 20 years ago, my first 10-day hunt, I took a lion, a buffalo, leopard, and an impala. I only shot one plains game species out of 4. Yeah. So, I think it's really personal preference. A guy can have a lot of fun, hunting plains game and get to go to a place where you get to see and experience a lot of game. But I think people also need to realize that if you hunt a truly wild, remote area for potentially dangerous game, that the hunting actually can be arduous. It can be difficult. It can be hard to find some of your quarries. So, you kind of want to keep that in mind as you pick, which one's best for you. Do you want to see and experience and do all the things and have fun and not make it too rough and tough? Or, if you're willing to stick it out and be rough and tough, sometimes dangerous game stuff can be a lot of fun.
Now, what does PH mean?
Stands for Professional Hunter.
And why is that important to somebody who's thinking of going to Africa?
Well, listen, it's no different than going with a guide here. First of all, when you're traveling halfway around the world, I think it's very important that you have somebody that's knowledgeable and experienced in one, the area that you're hunting, and 2, of course, the game that you're hunting. if you've never seen a kudu or an eland or something of these sorts that you're after, I mean, you won't know a difference between a small one and a big one. And certainly, look, a lot of the females there have horns, just like the males do. So you want somebody that can differentiate that from you. You want somebody that also, and generally speaking, knows the local language and communicates with the trackers and the other people of the community. Somebody that knows how to keep you safe, especially if you get into situations where there could be dangerous game around. It's just a wise idea. And lastly, in a lot of places, it's required by law. So I think when you factor in all those things, it's pretty important. When a person's looking at doing a hunt in Africa or overseas, for most places, that you try to work with a reputable, quality, and experienced professional hunter.
So if I said to you, I really want to kill a kudu and whatever else comes along, I got 10 days to fly over. So really, I'm probably going to get a 5-day hunt on plains game. What's that going to run me?
Depending on the number of animals, but now a lot of days you can find some very reasonable packages on like 5 to 7 days. 7 days are very popular days of hunting. You can find some very good packages for $4,000 to $6,000 where you shoot 3 to 5 different animals. When you really look at that, even your airfare included, let's say you got all this stuff, you're $10,000 into it. Heck, man, there's a lot of elk hunts out west now that are $10,000 plus. And, you can go to Africa and shoot 3 to 5 animals and have a fabulous time for roughly the same price.
And remember that, folks. That wasn't always the case, but it is today, because there are some ranches here in Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona. If you go down to, I'm thinking the White Mountain Apaches, San Carlos, stuff like that. It's eye-popping. It's over $20,000, if I'm correct, Aaron.
Oh, yeah, no, well over 20,000. No, that's right. I mean, look, a lot of your good quality elk hunts now, all throughout the West, Utah, I would include in that too. I mean, you're looking at anywhere from, average quality hunts for $7,500 to as much as, $25,000 plus. Some of the good reservations are, well over that. So it's, it can be very costly. And not that I'm not discriminating against the value of what they have to offer. I'm just simply saying that, for the same exact money, if you've done it a time or two on some of these, you could have some very good experiences, whether it be, in Africa, Asia, even Alaska, Canada, some of these other places for what amounts to be, roughly the same kind of money.
So think about that. And one thing I learned, a guy told me a long time ago, he says, Bruce, it's expensive hunting this ranch, but think about it. You could hunt this ranch. I was in my 40s then. He said, you could hunt this ranch every 10 years. Yeah, you got to set aside some money every single month, but you could hunt it every 10 years for the next, 20 or 30 years and have some of the best hunting in North America if you budget for it. And it's no different than Africa. See, people just get mesmerized. Oh, I can't do that. You actually can, and maybe you don't have as many beers. Maybe you quit smoking cigarettes. Maybe you don't buy that new truck. But truly, if you really want to do it, you can come up with $10,000, and that can take you 10 years. You can really do it. And the other thing is, the first time, try to go with a friend. And for the travel, just the travel portion of it. Your thoughts on that, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I agree. Part of what we all enjoy about hunting is the camaraderie of who we're with and who we're getting to share the experience with. Certainly if you've got the opportunity, whether it be friends or family that also have the same desire and the same wherewithal that you have, by all means, it's great to go. And oftentimes you can get even just a little bit better package deals over there if you're doing a 2x1. And I'll tell you, in most of these places, the game density is so great that it is not in any way, shape, or form going to affect your success. But it does allow you to spend the time with your buddy or your friend, maybe even your daughter or son, and all be successful. And, like I say, at the bottom line, maybe save just a little bit of money doing it too.
Let's switch gears and come back to North America. And, you've hunted just about every single game in North America. What was your favorite hunt in North America?
Well, I'll tell you this. Look, growing up here in Colorado, from a small child, the North American, the elk, the Rocky Mountain elk, has always been my go-to. That's my love. But the fact is, the greatest adventure that I've ever had here in North America has been hunting the polar bear. Fabulous experience. A place that I never thought that I would get to see. Some of the things I got to experience in the Arctic and out on the pack ice, and actually seeing a live wild polar bear was a pretty amazing experience, and one I probably won't ever get to repeat again. But if I had to choose one great adventure, it would be the polar bear. If I had to choose only one animal left in North America that I could continue to hunt forever, it would definitely be the elk.
And thanks for that. I've never hunted polar bear. I had a couple of friends that did, and they said it's arduous because, one, it's cold and you're behind snow sleds, and he actually stayed in the igloo. What was your experience?
Well, we actually, my guys put up a wall tent and, lined the floors with caribou skin rugs and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it is very arduous. I mean, it's quite cold, although if you're prepared with the right gear, it actually seems like, heck, I've been colder sitting in a blind waiting for a whitetail to walk by, to be honest with you. But, it was cold, but it was just the fact to be able to see and experience not only the Inuits and their Inuit community and the way that these guys were able to, function and thrive in that sort of environment versus a guy like me that was just there, completely at their mercy. I mean, if it wasn't for their expertise and their ability to get around it, the Lord knows what would have happened. But, overall, it was a tremendous experience. I was very happy to do it. Would have loved to do it again. But, it's not for the faint of heart. Let's put it that way.
And even, you go up to Shefferville and you hunt up there for caribou. I was at Kuujjuaq, which is a little ways up there above Montreal, and you spend the time with the Inuits. That's what you do. And I remember one of the elders, we're talking in camp, and I said, how did you people do it? Because you got to understand, the Inuits came over the land bridge thousands of years ago.
That's right.
And the elder said it's simple. He says, if caribou come, we live. If they don't come, we die. And I've never forgotten that. I mean, that's their culture, and they use caribou for everything. Did you have them make a caribou suit for you during your hunt?
No, listen, I didn't. I actually used, some of the stuff that you would get here. And I've been there a couple of times. Not only have I done the polar bear, but I've also done the muskox, which takes place, in the Arctic as well. And, one thing that I found very interesting about, their culture versus, any other place that I've been. I mean, look, let's face it. I mean, I know nowadays the tagline a lot of us hunters like to use is, we're hunting for food, and we're hunting for food. But, I think you and I both know, and I think most people would admit that, I mean, none of us are really out there anymore hunting because it's our sole source of survival. But when you see what happens with the Inuits and how much they really do thrive and rely on the fish and the caribou and the bear and the things that they're able to subsist on, they're probably one of the true last remaining cultures in the world that, hunting is truly a large part of their subsistence. And it was really neat to see that.
And that's the other part of traveling. And Aaron done a heck of a lot of more travel. As I said, I haven't been to Africa yet. But in North America, I can remember just sitting with the Inuits or being with some of the First Nation people up in the upper reaches of Canada, or even into Alaska. And then you drop down into Mexico and a completely different culture. But what I like to share, and I'll just throw this out, we all have common ground because we're hunters. Your thoughts on that, Aaron?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think it's one thing that really is interesting. So whether it's been the Inuits or the people of the North, I mean, like you say, I've 200 on tribal lands here in the West. South America, I've hunted with the Aborigines in Australia. I've hunted with the native blacks in Africa, and I've hunted with the Pakistani people in Pakistan. And what's most interesting is when you really look at those entire dynamics of all these different cultures, as a political world and the things we see now, it's we have racial tensions and we have wars with Muslims and go on down the list. But what's been very interesting is when I go to these two places and you're hunters and they're hunters, and it's like, man, we all just enjoy the camaraderie of being together. I've made some of my greatest friends in these places, and elsewhere you would have thought that we would have been at odds at each other's throats, but just that common ground of hunting brought us together to both laugh, share, and enjoy doing the exact same thing that we love to do. And I really don't think a lot of the people around the world who aren't hunters don't realize just how much of a...
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your host, Bruce Hutchin. We had some technical difficulties, so I had to cut off the show when I was editing it. And thank you, Aaron Neilson, from all our listeners across North America for sharing not only hunting elk and whitetails, but the common ground that we have and talking about the hunting tradition and talking about the uniqueness that hunting brings to the campfire. No matter where you are in the world, if you're with a group of hunters, you're brothers. So again, thank you so much, Aaron Neilson from Global Hunt Resources. Now, folks, make sure you listen to the next episode. AJ Gall, community director of Legendary Whitetails, is going to talk to us about his rut forecast for 2016. It's going to break it down into 4 different segments or targets or indicators, as I like to say, of the rut. So stay tuned. It's going to be an awesome show. You're going to tell your friends and neighbors all about it.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.